Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I get to talk today to two female peacekeepers. The first two female peacekeepers I ever met, and they're going to tell me what their jobs are and what the challenges are being a peacekeeper in this world nowadays. So, both of them are Canadians. Both of them have been taking a course together recently in Toronto at the Canadian Forces College, which is a place for high-ranking military people to come and get refresher courses. Therefore, they're well acquainted, but I'm just now getting acquainted with them. In Britain, we have Major Alison Lucas, who is in the Canadian Army. She's posted in York. And in Ottawa, we have Lieutenant Commander of the Royal Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, Amber Comisso. And I'm delighted to meet you both. And I hope that you will tell me a lot about what you've been posted to do in the past. I want to know more about peacekeeping. And I, in particular, want to know what is special about being a female peacekeeper. Amber, hi.
Hi, Meta. How are you?
I'm great. Good to meet you. So you're in the Navy, and are there peacekeepers in the Canadian Navy?
Yeah, so I think that, peacekeeping, especially in a naval context, is quite different. I know growing up, I think of the classic peacekeeper with the blue beret, on land. And certainly in the Navy, that's not the environment that we work in at all. So my earliest memories is I was a sub-lieutenant, and the ship was deployed on Operation Apollo. So this was very shortly after 9/11, and we had dispatched ships overseas. And I had joined that deployment towards the tail end of it. So they had been out there for about 6-7 months.
Where was out there?
In the Persian Gulf. So we were basically patrolling the Persian Gulf. We were enforcing a United Nations Security Council resolution. So it's interesting because when I think about my classic idea of blue beret, boots on the ground, and then I think of, my experience peacekeeping was essentially patrolling the waters of the Persian Gulf, querying different cargo ships about what they had on board, and certainly if we were unsure about what they were carrying on board, we would send a team to dispatch, search the vessel. And so a really different idea. So it was interesting because my idea of classic peacekeeping and then what I was doing in the Royal Canadian Navy was quite different. And then as the Navy has also done other piracy controls. So again, under a United Nations Security Council resolution, I think it was HMCS Winnipeg in 2009, was patrolling the Somali coast and anti-piracy ops. So it's interesting because I don't think Canadians really think about peacekeeping in that naval context, but certainly as a Royal Canadian Navy officer, that's what I know of peacekeeping personally.
Oh, okay. Well, that puts a whole new light on it. Well, in that case, you must have had some capacity for enforcement. I mean, there are various categories, as I understand it, of peacekeepers. People who are, there used to be unarmed peacekeepers, and then there are these light armed white helmet folks, and who really don't enforce much of anything, do they? But then there's certain, is it Chapter 7 of something of the Security Council? The UN Charter allows, under certain circumstances, for enforcement of UN resolutions.
And certainly my experience was more, we were enforcing the resolution. So, we would search, but if there was anything suspect at all, we didn't really play a part in that. I think that's perhaps evolved a little bit. The Navy has developed a naval tactical operations group, which is able to do a bit more searching, and so that's enhanced that capacity. But my experience was really that, querying merchants on the water, making sure that, they were carrying what they said they were carrying, Operation Apollo was really after 9/11, and we were trying to get to the sources of terrorism, and we knew that there was, you know, illegal smuggling going across that water. And so our job was basically to query all the ships in the area. And, you know, some days we would ask a lot of questions and, you know, nothing much would come of it. And then other days you'd get something where you thought, maybe I think we should look into this. But that was our part, you know, very small part of it. But really something when Canadians think about peacekeeping, I'm not sure that that's what they imagine. You know?
Now, I should have introduced both of you about the same time. So, Alison, say hello.
Hello, how are you?
Doing fine. And now you all know each other. So tell me a little bit about what you do, and then I want to see how you get along. What you guys talk about when you think you're alone.
So Amber and I have quite different functions in the military. So I'm part of the Canadian Army, and the service that I work for has just been renamed the Royal Canadian Logistics Service, and that basically encompasses anything from the movement of kit from place to place, transportation at the smaller level, supplies, food, bullets, any kind of ammunition as well. So my trade basically takes care of the variety of different functions that kind of we get stuff to people who require it and then who use it. So my trade is much more getting the stuff to the ship, or for example, Amber on her ship has a logistic officer who helps make sure that their ship stays running throughout the course of its very long transit time from place to place.
So is your title, does it involve logistics?
Yeah, so I'm a logistic officer in the Canadian Army.
Okay, I know what that word means. I bet everybody knows nowadays.
Supply chain management, yeah, you hear all those buzzwords. It's kind of nice to hear it now, because it wasn't quite as much a thing back when I first joined.
All right, very good. Okay, so now you've been taking a course together at the Royal, it's connected to the Royal Military College, but I guess it's like sort of like a graduate school or something at the Canadian
That's
Forces.
exactly it.
Yeah, and that's here in Toronto. And occasionally we have events up there because one of the faculty members is a friend of mine, can get a dining room when we got it and so on. So
I think probably one of the most interesting parts of the course that we recently took was when we talked about UNSCR 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And so it was interesting as, you know, senior leaders in the military to start to think about how can we incorporate gender considerations into operations, specifically peacekeeping. And I read some great stuff when I was working on a paper on diversity about how there's really good research that when you involve women in peacekeeping, the chances of success are much greater. So what it really got me thinking about, though, is that, you know, still in the military, we have a small percentage of women. I think we're at about 15%, probably a little bit less in the Army, and Alison can correct me on this. But so the thing that I was really thinking about at school is, if we know that, you know, women bring good, important, distinct qualities to peacekeeping, but we don't have a lot of women in the military, then how do we increase this capacity? So, you know, because what I felt I learned from school was, you know, yeah, this is going to make us better. This is going to make us more successful. But then, you know, I thought personally, but how are we going to actually make this happen? Because we still, you know, don't have a lot of women in the military. And, you know, is it a matter of, if you want to make sure that it's a female peacekeeper going, then is it the same women going over and over again? I'm not sure.
I understand there are something like worldwide, it says something like there are about 30% women in the civilian part of it, but much fewer in the military, and something maybe 10% in the police functions, but only something like 3% in the military function. But now you guys, if Canada's up to 15%, we're doing very well.
Oh, well, yeah, I think that, you know, 15% we have, you know, about approximate women in the Canadian military. Now it's a matter of if we want, and you're right, we're really championing this in the best way to say, we know that this will enable success. And so we want to make sure that there's more women peacekeepers. But then there's the logistics of when you don't have a large female population in your force, how do you make that happen? That's the thing I think we are leading. I think you're right. I think we realize that it will enable success. And even when you look at the current defense policy, there's a lot about, you need to incorporate gender perspective into operations if you're going to be successful. I think the thing that I think about, though, is, how do we do that in practicality? And maybe Alison had some ideas.
Oh, in fact, I want to know how both of you happened to decide on a military career, because it's nothing that would ever occur to me,
Yeah, that's fair. I'll try, I guess, I'll go in no particular order. So first, I guess, how did I decide to join the military? So my father was in the Air Force. So I saw his interesting career, traveling a lot, doing a lot of interesting jobs. I really liked the idea of, I guess, giving back a little bit to the country. So I thought, sure, I'll try and join. There's this really great program where they basically put you through university, and then provided you give them 5 years, hard work afterwards, then that's you scot-free. But I continued to enjoy it. So I stayed in the military until this day, and I've gotten a lot out of it. So that's why I got involved, and that's why I stayed, because I've quite enjoyed what I've been doing, and I've met a lot of interesting people and seen a lot of interesting things.
I have a niece who has done the same thing and became an MD in the U.S. She's a radiologist in the U.S. and had to work for 5 years after her graduate school training to pay off her commitment to the military. She's still in it.
Yeah, I have friends who are lawyers, friends who are medical doctors as well, and again, they really like the fact that they can give back, get experience, and then once it's their time, they can say later and still have had that really great experience.
So far you're still in it. That must mean that you may still continue for a while, or do you have plans to leave?
Well, I mean, I've enjoyed myself. I've gone on many very interesting postings. I've deployed a bunch of times. I've been involved a little bit in peacekeeping as well as training for peacekeeping. So I've had the level of experience for me has been really beneficial. So I like it. I'll probably stay until I am not having as much fun, which currently I don't really see that time frame being in the near future.
All right, very good. So, and both of you have the same attitude. You're not on the verge of quitting.
No, I think, it's really exciting. I mean, it's not always a very easy lifestyle. I mean, I've got 2 small kids and we do move a lot. But it's always something new. And like Alison, I feel like I'm actually making a difference. I'm, when my girls ask, why do I go away? Well, I try and say that mom's doing something important, mom's representing Canada. And it's funny because unlike Alison, I actually really stumbled into the military. And I'm surprised that, so it's been 22 years, so I'm surprised I've been in this long. But I was at a university information night, and off I went to check out some of the Ontario universities. And my mom watched the presentation on the military college. And she said, Amber, you got to watch this. You got to watch this. And she says, look, they're going to pay for school, your university degree, you're going to have a job afterwards. What a great start to life. And I remember I said to her, I said, Mom, but this is the military. And because I didn't, my 2 grandfathers were in the war, but that's it. I didn't have any parents that were in the military, didn't have any friends that were in cadets. And, the more I thought about it, the more it really made sense, So I got a university degree, and then I've traveled all over the world with the Navy. And like Alison, I'm just having a lot of fun, and when it stops being fun, I think I'll leave. But,
let me ask you
really privileged.
A really difficult, both of you, a difficult question. Calling it having fun is only something you would do if you're really not in a bad situation. But you might be sent to a place where nobody would call it fun. And you might be sent to a situation where you might have to do things that you don't agree with. Well, I shouldn't bring up such a difficult question so early in a conversation because I think, that's the first thing that would spring to mind for me is suppose somebody asks me to go shoot somebody, what would I do? Or be party to um, an operation that's going to kill a lot of people that I have some doubts about. And of course, I guess there are occasions when I wouldn't have any doubt about having to kill somebody. But, your job is, you don't get that flexibility, do you? It's not up to you to decide everything about who your target is, who your enemy is, who your friend is. And there's where I would have so much trouble. What do you say about things like that? Or do you ever talk about it?
Of course, we certainly absolutely have to. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm in the logistics branch. So my job does not often see me where that happens. So my job is making sure that the people who do face those difficult decisions have the stuff that they need so that they're not worried about, do I have enough food? Do I have enough water? Do I have enough life support? So they don't have that in their head so that they make maybe less well-informed decisions. So when they do have to make those hard choices, they can make it because they're completely focused on what they're doing. And there's no added distractions of like, man, I'm so hungry. Like, I can't believe this is my last jerry can of water. That's kind of like my job. So I've not been in too many personal situations where I truly feared for my life. I usually am stationed in bases or patrol bases or forward operating locations where there is a certain element of security. And while there is danger from perhaps a rocket attack or something along those lines, it's still not the same, face to face with the enemy just by the nature of my job. Our main focus when we talk with our troops about, difficult decisions that they may have to make, they're often more associated with self-defense, defense of others, defense of people who might be with them if they get into a really bad situation. So for us, the line is a little bit, I think, easier to draw because for us, it's defense of people, defense of really essential equipment or life-saving articles. So it's not quite the same asking me that question as it might be asking, say, an infantier or someone in the combat arms. But it certainly is a question that we bring up with our troops. We have in-depth, serious conversations with our peers and our subordinates and our supervisors and our bosses because it is a reality. I'm just, I guess, not often in a case where it would be, I have to make a decision that is based on like an attack versus a defend.
Yeah, and I would say that for the Navy, it's similar too, right? Because we're often offshore and away from the action. So while we know that threat is real, it's not like someone being in the combat arms and on the ground. But what we do is what I do feel good about is that when we are going into a situation, as Alison mentioned, it's often self-defense. And so it's making sure that our sailors understand the rules of engagement. And so, we have strict protocols that, we talk to our sailors that are going to be at that pointy end and basically explain to them what the rules of engagement are. It's a full brief, and then we make sure that they have the opportunity to actually ask the questions. Because you're right, when it's you and you have to make the decision yourself, we need to make sure we're well informed. And something I'm really proud of is that I think that we've seen a bit of a shift in the military where it used to be, do it because I said so, and now we're understanding that doesn't work, right? You need to make sure that your subordinates actually understand why you're doing things. And so I feel maybe less uneasy about that because we do have a very candid conversation, especially when we're going into a scenario where if we're going into a port and we might expect some resistance, we actually go through a full rules of engagement brief where we brief every single sailor face to face about, what they can do in self-defense, and so that it's clear. And there's an opportunity that, regardless of rank, that if you are unsure about, what you are allowed to do, that you can ask the question there in a safe space. So while I don't have any, direct experience, as Alison said, I feel like, we do have candid conversations because we know that's our business, right? we know that, we are asked to go places where, not everyone wants to go. And so I'm proud that I think we at least realize that, it could be an individual decision. And so we need to make sure that that person is really briefed and understands all the tools at their disposal. So.
Yeah, well, I'm a peace person, and I have been most of my life. And that means that I'm a little bit suspicious of military people. Now, I'm not suspicious of peacekeepers. You see, I make an exception because I see peacekeeping as defensive, protecting people. And I see people similar to police action. When I call the police, I know they're going to try to defend me, but they're not necessarily going to chase if somebody's breaking into my house, they're not eager to kill him. They're not trying to defeat him. They just want to keep him out of my house, And to me, that's the beauty of the operation. I'm really glad that there are police in the world, and I'm glad there are peacekeepers in the world, insofar as they're protecting everybody as much as possible. And but the decision about who is the country's enemy is made by the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Parliament, not even Parliament so much. I mean, the decision about foreign policy and who is your friend and who is your enemy is not for the military people to decide. Right?
Exactly.
And therefore, if somebody says this guy is your enemy, and we are at war against these people, go kill him. That's where I would have so much trouble. So that is, I think, the real question that would keep me from being able to serve in the military, unless I knew that it was just a peacekeeping operation. And as I understand it, and I've actually talked to a number of former peacekeepers who say, well, the trend has been over the last few decades, for peacekeeping to become much more of a war-fighting operation. You take sides. You're defending one group of people against another, and you actually use military means of aggression to do it. So that's not defensive. That's not protecting people. Except if you do some interesting word magic to decide what is protection. I mean, sometimes you can say, well, it's legitimate to take the initiative and kill somebody preemptively because you think they're going to do something bad to you, and therefore you're really protecting, etc. That kind of reasoning you can do that kind of thing, and that's where my mind freezes up. So you must have that conversation a lot. And can you give me what the official answer is? Suppose you were told, and for example, I've just been having a debate with another peace activist friend over Venezuela, because I'm on one side and most of my friends are on the other side. And so we're debating about who's the bad guy in Venezuela, and whose side whom we should be protecting and helping.
I'm not sure if I really have much that I can add to the conversation of Venezuela in particular.
No, I didn't really intend this to be about Venezuela, but about the general idea of being you could be sent to Afghanistan or Iraq and told who the enemy is.
So that is certainly correct. Although, again, say for example, we are sent to Afghanistan and the mission that we are accomplishing is not necessarily often go and kill these people. It's more here we want this effect to happen. We want this area to be safe. We want the government that has been elected to be able to flourish here. So we want there to be a military presence to facilitate that. And then if there is any activity against the military presence, then it does involve more of a defensive nature to it. Like I know some of the examples of when I was in Afghanistan, for example, were some of the activities we took were primarily defensive based on attacks that had been conducted against us. I don't know, Amber, if you have any experiences from the Navy that might be relevant for this.
Not really. I mean, I guess the thing is, it's hard because we really, I think Macy, you said earlier, it's not really for us to decide. You know what I mean? What I know for sure is that I know the people I know for sure, having just come to Canadian Forces College, that, the up and coming leaders of the military are incredibly compassionate and brilliant and kind, and really just want to live in a better world and leave a better world for our kids. You know what I mean? So it is hard that it's really not our choice, and we don't really have an opinion on it. I mean, that's it's funny, even election season is here, and quite often we'll get people come to the door, and my kids will be there, and I'll say, I can't and don't have an opinion on it because I am in the military, and so, but what I do know for sure though is that I really, I'm not sure if, we don't do a very good job at explaining to Canadians what we do, or even who we are. And so I think that, and I don't know, Mita, if it brings you comfort at all, but like, I know the people in our military are, just, they use their brain, and they make informed decisions, and they are compassionate, and I just can't believe that they would just blindly go and follow something that they didn't feel was right. Now I hear exactly what you're saying. It's a really tricky situation, but what I know is that even the course that Alison and I were on together, I mean, we spent 10 months looking at command and leadership and world politics and security studies and peacekeeping and gender and really important topics, and debated them and formed opinions about them, and really, I know for myself, really changed the way I think about things, as we were talking earlier about how to get more women into peacekeeping, because we know that there's good research that says that it will make our operations more successful. So I think that's it. I don't know, that's a great answer for you, but I guess I rest on the strength of our people making really good decisions, because I know the people that I've met in my Navy and my other colleagues at Staff College are just really good people with good heads on their shoulders, if that makes sense.
I just want to, you just made me think of something, Amber, that I think it really started to develop this past year for a lot of the people in the course. It was the understanding that actions they have consequences, absolutely, but they have secondary, tertiary, there are much greater consequences to small actions. We talked a lot about, okay, yes, there's this situation, yes, it's dangerous, and yes, we fire back on somebody and there's a death in the population. The consequences of that can be so much more dramatic than just us trying to save the life of one of our people, or even not even sure that it's going to escalate that far, but just getting the senior leaders of the future to really kind of consider what are the full-on consequences that could actually happen from any action that we take. And I do really think that can have a huge impact on on the actions that we do take when we do have to deploy on behalf of the government, because we do have to consider where else could this go, what other negative consequences could there be, and how can we take a step back and try and make the consequences good and not spiraling into a much worse situation. So that was really very valuable, I found, for the last year.
Let me give you an example of a friend of mine who was an officer in the Israeli army and was sent to Lebanon. This must have been 20-some years ago, because he's been a sociology professor for about 15 years now. So because he quit, he said he every morning he had to line up the people, the troops, and give them a pep talk, or say what they were supposed to be doing for the day and why it was the plan. And he couldn't give a good reason for why they were there or what they were supposed to be doing. He didn't believe in it. And he quit. I think he went to jail for a while because he wouldn't do it. Now, have you ever met anybody who's done that? And what would you think of a person for saying, I just won't do it?
So in my time, I have not necessarily met anyone who had that level of disagreement with the task they had been asked to do, either on deployment or back in Canada. I can definitely see that, you know, in the situations in the world that are happening to this day, not in necessarily Canadian, there are tons of examples where, you know, if someone decided, I'm not doing that, I can't do that, I can completely respect that, because there are many hugely challenging decisions that people are faced with, and if they can't make them, or if they won't make them, then I definitely agree that they should stand by what they believe in and not. So I think he definitely made the right call and got out when he could, because if he couldn't, you know, hand on heart say, yes, I believe the cause that we're going for, yes, I believe in what we're doing, then how can he expect his troops to follow his lead?
Yeah, and I'm with Alison too. I haven't ever met anyone in that scenario, but you know, I empathize. I think you know, we're human. I think it's funny, you know, when I meet people and I say that I'm in the military, there's a misconception about, you know, the person that I am. You know, yes, I'm in the military. That's my job, my career, but I'm also a mom. You know, I like yoga, you know, that sort of thing. And so I think, you know, we're humans. You know, I'm not sure we've done a really good job at explaining what we do. And I know, like, you know, for the Navy, I think I'm really proud of the stuff that we're doing currently. I mean, we've got ships.
I think when you say you feel you haven't done a good job of explaining, I think you have, or maybe not you in particular, but I think in general, the justification and rationale for the military is very fully accepted and understood by the public. And when I raise these difficult questions, I know that I'm an outlier on this, because this is not the way the average person thinks. They wouldn't even think to ask you such things, right?
Yep. But they're great questions, right? You know, because you're right. We are faced with difficult decisions, right? I mean, I personally have never been in that scenario where I felt like, and I don't know if maybe it's because, you know, when we do go on missions, you know, I feel like there's been good explanation as to, you know, why we're going there and what we're going to do and what we're trying to achieve. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of our strengths. But no, I think it's great that you ask these questions, and I think it's great that you have conversations like this, because yeah, you're right. It's not, you know, I think for women especially, it's not a career that everyone would consider.
Right.
And you know, I think that's kind of sad sometimes, because yes, of course, there is the part where we could and, you know, will be asked to go into harm's way. But I think another aspect of the career well, I'm not always convinced we talk about, is that we're a great Canadian ambassadors. You know, we really, you know, go globally and represent Canadian values, and that's something I'm really proud of. So I think it's great that you ask these hard questions. It gets us thinking. So no worries on this end.
I can turn the question a little bit. Now you've taken this course. I'd like to know a little bit about the nature of the course, what it is they're trying, you know, they want you to know or think about, and then let's go back to the question of women peacekeepers, because we didn't really get to that. I got you thrown off track. But tell me about your course.
Okay, so the course was not quite 1 year. It was from August until June this past year. And it basically pulled together roughly the same age, rank, stage in their career group of people from all across the different forces. So there's the Army, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and then also international students there are 25 different international students from, I think, 15 or 17 different countries, all coming together. And we had, basically there were 3 kind of sections to the year. The first section was quite research intensive. We had a lot of essays we had to write. We had a lot of like in-depth conversations with our peers about command, as Amber said, leadership, about, you know, how the military works, what's going on in the world, kind of like making us really think and really consider and take sides in a situation and then argue across the room. So we'd have debates about, you know, significant issues like, hey, I really think that it's important for, women to be in the combat arms, and the other half would have to argue against it, or, really important to have women in peacekeeping, or argue against it, or, I think AI, artificial intelligence, is like the latest greatest, we should pour lots of money into it. So we really have got a chance to kind of exercise our brains, exercise our ability to kind of form a coherent argument and really kind of articulate what we were thinking for that first section. And then the second one was kind of more dedicated to the operational planning process, which is basically a way that most militaries have a way of kind of like, this is how you should organize things. Once you get a problem, this is how you should look at it, and you carry it through to a variety of solutions, and then you develop the final idea that's kind of chosen. Across the militaries, there's a whole bunch of different names for it. We call it the operational planning process. So then we spend a lot of time kind of digging through a couple different, hypothetical scenarios in a hypothetical world situation. So we had one that we had a peacekeeping, we had a stabilization, we had a war fighting example. So we got to carry these scenarios out and try and plan how we might be reacting to them in the real world. And then the third section was digging even deeper into one of our 3 chosen options. So I chose global issues, as did Amber. So again, kind of going further into what's going on in the world, really examining like current issues and trying to kind of articulate where we think the world is going, or how we think that if we could make a decision, we want to make that decision. So that was kind of
before I turn to Amber on this, because you've got me now wondering, what did this do to you? Would you say that you came out in any way with your thinking changed, or your opinions different as a result of these discussions, or this year in Toronto, or not?
I mean, I don't think you could spend a whole year with 128 people and not get a greater perspective for even just other people's opinions. Even just I'm in the Army, so I tend to see more people in the Army, or more people in logistics. So you get kind of thinking in that kind of mindset. Whereas I was talking to people from all across. I had the Navy, I had more Air Force, I had international students with their at times extremely different perspective. And so even just that kind of broadening of the I never thought of it that way before.
Me, I really appreciated the emphasis on critical thinking. Really, and I love that we looked at history, and it's important to understand the history of a place when you go there, especially in a peacekeeping context. And the other thing I really took away was that idea of like an echo chamber. And I really had to question about, was I just reinforcing my own opinions, or should I actually, reach out and be critical about, where am I getting my news from? Am I looking at a variety of opinions? And, how come I didn't consider it that way? So,
other women in the course, in the program? Just the 2 of you, or were there other women?
So 128 students, and there were, I think 20 ladies.
Uh-huh. Okay, and you call them ladies. I've stopped using that word. Some people mad at me for saying,
I like it. I don't know.
Talking to
I always like
and then they say, oh, I'm not a lady. Anyway, there you go. So now, and then you went right back to some job you already had, or have you taken a different position? What are you doing now? And are you different because of your experience? Or are you asked to do different things now? What are your jobs?
I was lucky enough to get an exchange posting out of the country, so that's why I'm in England right now with one of the units here. We have an exchange where a Canadian comes here, and then they send a British military officer to Canada to complete a similar level staff job. So this is my second week at work, so I can't yet answer that question, I'm afraid. Mm-hmm. But I imagine due to, usually if there's someone who's done this type of course, obviously the UK has the equivalent, they would tend to ask different things out of them. So perhaps they will, perhaps they'll take it easy on me because I'm Canadian, and they like to, work their own people hard. I'm not sure how they'll do that for me. So
I'm in a staff job. I'm working for Navy headquarters and in charge of personnel policy for the Navy. So the course really assisted me, because the things that we're looking at right now is diversity, inclusion, all this great stuff that I just spent 10 months really thinking critically about. So like Alison, I'm only 2 weeks in the job, so I haven't quite figured out yet, But, I think that, it was kind of exciting today. I got dragged into a meeting and they said, well, you've just come from staff college. And so, we expect that you can think more critically about things. So can you please join us in cracking this difficult problem? I said, well, I don't know, sir. I hope so. But yeah, so no, it's exciting. And I feel like I've got some really good skills to, pave the way for the Navy of the future, and just to make a better force, and to make things better. So I really, I feel really excited about what's yet to come once I figure out, more about personnel policy.
Well, good for both of you. I hope you both enjoy it and are great and find it really worthwhile. Now I want to shift back to peacekeeping, if we may. This article that I didn't quite read, I was going to start to read, said that peacekeeping operations are more successful if they include women. And I didn't get the answer. So give me the official answer and then tell me whether or not you agree with that answer.
So the official answer, I'm not sure if I know the official answer. I know an answer that we heard and we certainly read about a lot in this past year at the course was just that the people in the population who you're there to help are going to be a lot more receptive, or there's going to be a lot more perspective that you're going to offer to them if you have multiple different, if you have people who can empathize with half the population. And if you miss out on that half who are also experiencing issues and who might not feel comfortable talking to peacekeepers of a different gender from themselves, then you're not going to be able to help the people that you're there to help to the greater degree that you might be able to. In terms of trying to, broker agreements between two different sides, you cannot necessarily bring the full picture if you are only getting half from whichever side you're trying to help. So that's an answer that I definitely saw repeatedly throughout a lot of the literature. Some issues just aren't brought up at all that are actually huge issues, but since maybe if you only have the gentleman there, they don't hear about it because people aren't comfortable. So that's one perspective at least.
Amber, do you is that?
That's the similar concept that resonated with me. I think also that, the research shows that women are more disproportionately affected by conflict. There's good research on that. And so, understanding women's concerns. And sometimes, as Alison said, you need a female peacekeeper to hear those concerns, or to even, sometimes, a woman might only want to talk to another woman. And so if you have no female peacekeepers, you're never going to understand that story. And so how are you going to provide a solution to that? So,
But now the work that you said that you had done as a peacekeeper didn't sound like that kind of thing at all. Here you were intercepting pirate ships on the off the coast of Africa, and boarding them to search for them. I don't imagine that it helped at all to be a woman in that situation. Or
no, fair enough. But what I do understand is that we are being more conscious about, looking for opportunities. I think we've got a great connection with Ghana right now, and in that women, peace, and security agenda, and ensuring that we can be more present, we can offer perspectives, we can offer training. So
you had a closer connection with Uganda, or what did you say?
Ghana. I think we were doing some work, capacity building basically. I think Canada is really looking to lead in the women, peace, and security agenda, and basically, trying to figure out what we can.
What's going on with Ghana? I don't know that story.
I think there's just some good. I think they've come here to do some training. We've gone there, and just the idea of understanding each other better, learning from each other better. Basically, what we're looking for is to partner with other countries so that we can bring our Canadian peacekeeping skills, and then we can obviously learn from them. So I think it was the Peacekeeping Center had come for a presentation at the school, and they mentioned that they were, one of the countries that they had started to partner with was Ghana, and I think there's other countries as well. But it's all under that same umbrella of women, peace, and security, and realizing that gender perspectives are really important in operations.
Well, I know
need
that officially the Liberal Party government of the day in Canada, one of its official statements is that we have a feminist foreign policy. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't a clue what that is. I did not look at unpacking what that meant, except to say maybe we are kinder and gentler than other countries. I'm not quite sure. So tell me whether or not you see any real impact of that policy in actual directives of operations, of how you do things differently than if the official Canadian policy were not to have a feminist foreign policy, whatever that means.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I did some research on this too and was also surprised to find that out. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Very interesting. I think one of the things that we've done in the Canadian military is, out of UNSCR 1325, Women, Peace and Security, we came out with a directive that said that we would send gender advisors on operations to ensure that all perspectives are considered. We also have the government's gender-based analysis plus, which is basically just a tool to make sure that we've considered all perspectives. And so, we're incorporating this into operations, and it made it be great if you could talk to one of our gender advisors, because they're just, everyone that I've met so far has been really fascinating. Yeah, so we are doing, I don't know if that it's completely related to the feminist foreign policy, but I do know that it's under the umbrella of UNSCR 1325 and making sure that, we have gender perspectives incorporated into operations. I'm not sure, Alison, if you can add to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The main thing I was going to bring up was just the fact that I think shortly after the new prime minister came in 2015, I know the Canadian military kind of articulated the desire, the drive to reach 25% ladies within the military as a goal to slowly increase the number of people up until I think the late 2020s. That was when they were hoping to reach the goal of the 25%. So there started to be more recruiting, more retention drives towards things that might appeal to some ladies who are interested but have not joined or who never considered it and now can think of it as an option. So that came in, I think, relatively shortly after. So that was one thing that I saw that the military seemed to be trying to do. With the mission last year that left in the summer to supply air med evacuation in Mali, I know they were certainly trying to get a higher percentage of ladies to go as well, because the government had said, hey, more countries should be sending more ladies on peacekeeping operations and UN missions. And so Canada was trying to do the same. So a lot of ladies were kind of more encouraged to participate and to join to try and do that operation, because we wanted to be sending that same message. So those are two things that I know kind of happened since it was Prime Minister Trudeau versus.
Well, you didn't go to Mali though, right? Yeah,
I was there. I was there helping basically the theater activation. So my job was related to movements. So basically controlling the inflow via plane of getting all the kit and equipment we needed there. So I ended up being primarily based out of our mid-staging area, which was not in Mali, but I ended up in Mali for a few days once we got everything there to do the old high five, and then I went on.
Were you expected to, and did you have interactions with the local women in Mali, the townswomen and so on? I think they wear burqas and all, don't they?
So since I was only involved in the getting everybody there, I was quite frankly very busy kind of with the military aspect, with the locals in Senegal, which is where we were based out of. So in Senegal, I definitely saw more ladies there. I did not get too much time to do that in Mali, because it was basically get everyone there as quickly as possible, and then I had to go on a course. So I actually had to get back to Canada quite quickly after most stuff was there. Most of our equipment had been moved. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I think you also said that you had been in Afghanistan.
Yes, I went.
Is that would be someplace that I would think it would be very relevant to be a woman in terms of interacting, if you're expected at all to interact with the local population?
So I didn't have much interaction myself because my job was, again, based more on the supplies, organizing routes, organizing timeframes. So they did not necessarily need me for that job, but I did have other female individuals that I know who were a bit more involved and who did go out and talk to people. And some of them actually did have much better kind of interactions because they were ladies, and they were able to kind of talk to not just the men, obviously, because the men saw them as soldiers, but they were able to talk to the ladies. And when I was there the second time, there were women who were used at kind of the security checkpoints, because then they could take the women, go off on the side, do whatever security checks they had to do, and then so there didn't have to be any kind of negative, men checking women. So they had that ability to have the ladies, fulfilling that role, having the easy, quick chat with them to make sure everything was fine, and then they could pass through. So that was a way that we definitely were able to use ladies.
Well, it sounds like you didn't really interact with locals, male or female. You mostly did with your peers in the military. Is that right? Your work was on the base with soldiers.
The main interaction I had with the locals was those who were delivering supplies, so the truck drivers, and it was all gentlemen. They were definitely all male drivers, because it did not seem to be a thing where the ladies were truck drivers.
Well, I'm just curious if you talk to people who did interact a lot with the local population or the people around, what was their attitude toward both the male soldiers, and how did the local people look at women, the male Afghan men and the townsmen and so on? How did they treat women soldiers?
So, I mean, from what I heard from some of my friends who had more interactions, they really kind of considered the female soldiers as soldiers. They did not necessarily see them quite as gendered as they did their local ladies. So not like we just didn't count as ladies, but we didn't have to follow the same procedures, I guess, as their locals would have to, or they felt that their locals might have to.
So they didn't feel that you were a disgrace to the sex. That's soldiers. They just discounted it as your gender as relevant. Is that how they would? I'm trying to imagine what a conventional, traditional Afghan man might think of a woman Canadian soldier.
So I think, they just accept that it's a cultural difference. So for us, culturally, it's acceptable for us to join the military, be in different trades within the military, go on deployment. They kind of just think, it seemed as though the consideration was just, okay, that's the way they do it. We don't do it that way. Okay,
that's all right. We can live with that. I can live with that much, Okay, and you have not been in a comparable situation, I guess, in the Navy.
No, not at all. I mean,
but you do go on long trips, and you have to leave your family. How long have you been at a time, and you're aboard a ship someplace in the Mediterranean or so?
Yeah, so my longest deployment recently was we sailed to Europe for 3 months. And my youngest was only about 1.5 years old. So that was challenging for sure. But, I think we've come a long way in that, they now have Wi-Fi on ships, so you can stay connected with your family. And, we realize that to do the nature of the work that we do, that our families need to be supported too. And so we're seeing some great stuff where, even though you go away for a couple of months, your family has the support that it needs to survive without you.
So in what way? What do they do for your family that they didn't used to do?
Well, I think that we're putting a little bit more money into programs. So, for example, I know that in winter months, sometimes if a ship is away, there's funding to for snow removal and just simple things to make life a little bit easier. Recognizing that it is hard to have mom or dad away. And just a lot more emphasis on checking in on families and making sure, I think it really was resonated with me, where we realized that, you know, a sailor is not a good sailor if they're worried about what's happening at home. You know, if they're worried about, you know, their spouse being supported and being able to handle the deployment. So, you know, we've seen the military family resource centers. I just feel like they're better equipping families for that deployment, which is exciting for me because, you know, this career is not easy. It's not easy on families, but it's nice to know that there's a realization that without that support, we really can't do what we need to do.
And, you're saying there is more support now.
Just a better realization that, you know, even I think recently you know, Military Families Day, and I saw something great on Twitter where we were celebrating that, you know, not only do we have amazing people in uniform, but we have the families that stand behind those people, you know, which involves, you know, moving often and, you know, deployments and things that aren't always part of everyone's life, you know, unique challenges of a military career. And so I'm encouraged because I feel like, you know, my family is important to me.
And you have enough support to people to look after your child or your children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which is important, right? You know, it's, you know, you don't want to go away and be worried that they're not okay. So,
and you've been able to call them Wi-Fi, video conference with your family from your ship.
Yeah, so it used to be you would type out a little email on a floppy disk and send it off and get a reply many weeks later. And then we went to satellite telephones, but we've now actually put Wi-Fi on the ships. So a sailor can sit there and FaceTime their kids and like feel like they're still part of their family, which is important.
Like if you had a child a year and a half old when you were away, what was the reaction? Did it was a girl or boy?
Two little girls.
Little girl, and she looks at mommy on the screen, and what does she do? How does she take to this?
Yeah, so sometimes it didn't always go well because she didn't really understand. You know, she was so small that, well, I see you, but I can't touch you, and you're not here. So, you know, I think we had to, you know, and sometimes at the end of the day, the kids are tired and you know, you just want to have a good conversation with them. So I tried to be a little bit smarter about when I would connect, but it was important and it was really good to feel like you hadn't just, you know, abandoned them or left them and that you were still connected to what's going on with at home. Well, listen, don't make me cry.
and your older child was able to understand a little bit more about why this was happening.
Yeah, and I, you know, I try and be honest with my kids because, you know, obviously the question is always like, you know, why do you have to go away? You know, why do you work on a ship that goes away? And, you know, I try and say that mom believes that she's doing something important, that she's representing Canada, and that, you know, that doesn't make it any easier. But I also, you know, another thing I tell my girls is that I'm trying to show them too that, you know, you can do whatever you want in this world. You know, if you want to be a sailor, go be a sailor, you know, be whatever you want to be. And so I think that's an important message for them to see that both moms and dads can join the military and have a successful career and do important things and represent Canada. So I can't say that it's always easy, but I just try and have an honest conversation about what mom does for a living.
Great. And what about you, Alison? Do you have people that you call up every day on video? And
I do, yeah. I mean, I'm single, but I have, you know, I have family back in Canada, my niece and nephew, and you know, but yeah, I still believe that what we're doing is important, and you know, I'm helping, you know, sell the Canada vision internationally, and also getting a really interesting opportunity to work. So good.
All right. Okay. Well,
Yes.
Thank you for what you're doing, both of you, and it's been very enlightening and certainly enjoyable talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a good
very
day.
much. It's been good.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
I'm Bye, Amber.
Bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.